I should have known the moment Ethan said, "Your father is ruining our life," that the thin wall between politeness and contempt had finally cracked. But what I didn't expect was to discover just how deep his resentment truly ran, or how blindly my daughter, Emily, had been pulled into it. The morning it all began, I was standing in my tiny kitchen reheating leftover coffee, the kind that tastes bitter even with sugar, when my neighbor, Mr. Callahan, knocked on my door and informed me that the heat in my rental building, my building, was out again. Every winter, the ancient system groaned under the stress, and every winter I paid to repair it because even though I didn't act like a landlord, I technically was one. I had purchased the building 20 years ago when real estate was cheap and held onto it after my wife passed, renting the units at barely enough to cover maintenance. Ethan and Emily had begged me for a place to stay after they got married, struggling with debt and newborn twins, and I gave them the second-floor apartment for almost nothing. They called me generous back then. They don't anymore. As I stood there debating whether to fix the heating myself or call the repairman, I heard my daughter's voice echo from the hallway above, the kind of sharp whisper designed to sound hushed but carries anyway. "Ethan, please don't start again," she murmured. "He's trying." "Trying?" Ethan snapped back. "Trying? He's 82, Emily. He can't fix anything. The heat goes out every other week, the plumbing is ancient, the floors creak. You said we'd build a life here, but instead we're living in some crumbling memory from his past." I froze at the bottom of the staircase, fingers curling around the railing as if bracing for a blow. My daughter sighed in that tired, apologetic way I knew too well. "He's doing the best he can," she whispered. "He gave us a place to live." "Yeah, for now," Ethan replied bitterly. "But how long before he falls down the stairs or forgets to turn off the stove? Then what? We'll be stuck taking care of him, and I refuse to spend my life babysitting an old man." Babysitting. The word punched harder than it should have. I stepped back before they noticed I'd been listening, but Ethan's voice followed me like a knife to the ribs. "Emily, I'm telling you, your father is ruining our life. We need out of this building, out of this whole situation." I went back into my apartment and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the grain of the wood as if answers were carved there. My daughter's husband, the man I helped feed, house, and support, saw me as nothing more than dead weight. And Emily, she hadn't defended me, not really, not the way a daughter would, not the way her mother would have. I spent the next hour pretending to read the newspaper while my mind replayed Ethan's voice over and over until it felt like a drill boring straight into my chest. My phone rang, Emily's name glowing on the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I needed air. I pulled on my old coat, the one my wife always teased me for keeping, and stepped outside into the crisp winter chill. Snow had begun collecting on the railing, and for a moment I stood there watching flakes land on the pavement like tiny cold confessions. I walked toward the main building entrance, stopping to inspect the heating pipes in the basement. They rattled like bones shaking in a tin can. It was clear they needed replacing. I sighed, rubbing my temples. How had I ended up becoming a burden in the very building I kept alive? While I was tightening a loose valve, I heard footsteps behind me, heavy ones. "Ethan." "Oh," he said, eyeing me with irritation rather than gratitude. "You're down here." "Just checking the heater," I said quietly, trying to fix the noise. He rolled his eyes. "We wouldn't need to fix anything if this building weren't falling apart." I looked at him, truly looked at him, his expensive coat, the watch I knew he couldn't afford, the posture of a man who believed he deserved more than he'd earned. "You know," I said carefully, "this building has stood longer than your marriage has." His jaw tightened. "Yeah, and it's about to collapse any day now. I'm talking to a realtor next week. We're moving out." I blinked. "A realtor?" "Yes," he said smugly. "We're buying a condo uptown. Emily and the kids deserve better." "And how?" I asked slowly. "Do you expect to afford that?" He smirked, actually smirked. "We'll get financing. They know Emily will eventually inherit this dump, so getting a loan won't be difficult. Your name on the building is as good as cash." Something inside me went ice cold. "Ethan," I said, voice low, "Emily is not going to inherit this building." His smile faltered. "What?" I straightened my back despite the ache in my spine. "You heard me." "What do you mean?" he demanded. "This will all be hers one day. She's your daughter." "She is," I agreed, "but that doesn't mean what you think it does." His face shifted, first confusion, then suspicion, then something darker, something greedy flickering behind his eyes. "You did," he started. "Tell me you didn't do something stupid." The irony almost made me laugh. "I updated my will," I said evenly, "months ago." His eyes widened, rage rising hot beneath his skin. "You can't do that. You can't just change things." "It's my property," I reminded him. "My choice, your choice," he spat. "So you'd rather watch us struggle than leave something useful behind? You're unbelievable." "And you," I said calmly, "are ungrateful." He stepped toward me, close enough that I could feel the heat of his anger radiating off him. "Undo it," he hissed. "Whatever you did, undo it." "No," his face twisted. "This is why I said you were ruining our life. Emily and I have plans, and you're standing in the way." "Perhaps," I said, "it's your expectations that need reevaluating, not my decisions." He stormed off, slamming the basement door so hard dust shook from the ceiling. I stood in silence, leaning against the cold metal of the boiler, feeling the weight of the truth pressing down. Ethan believed I owed him. He believed he was entitled to everything I had built. He believed I was ruining their life when he didn't even know what real ruin was. Not yet, but he was about to. Because the truth about my will, the truth about who I left everything to, hadn't even surfaced yet. And when it did, the shockwaves would hit this family like an earthquake. And Ethan would be the one left standing in the rubble. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the old radiators hiss and groan the way my joints did on rainy days, and replayed Ethan's words in my head like a bad recording I couldn't switch off. "Your father is ruining our life. You can't just change things, undo it." When Emily was little, she used to say I could fix anything: broken toys, leaky faucets, scraped knees, even the monsters under her bed. I'd sit on the floor, tap the wooden frame with my knuckles, and tell the monsters to go bother someone their own size. She'd giggle and cling to my arm, certain I had power over every shadow. Funny how life turns. One day you're the man who keeps the monsters away, and 30 years later, you're the one people whisper about like you're the threat. I got up before dawn, made coffee I didn't want, and sat at the kitchen table with the building's old ledger book in front of me. I'd bought this place in 1999, back when my wife Anna was still alive and I was still working full-time as an electrician. Everyone said I was crazy, buying a rundown brick box at the edge of town, but I saw possibility. Families in need of affordable rent, a steady income for retirement, a legacy of something solid. I poured years into this building: new wiring, patched roofs, replaced pipes with my own hands, while other men my age sat on couches complaining about their backs. When Emily and Ethan got married and suddenly couldn't afford rent anywhere decent, they came to me desperate. I'd given them Unit 2B for next to nothing, knocked an extra 100 off whenever the kids needed new shoes or daycare fees spiked. Back then, Ethan had called me a lifesaver, clapped me on the shoulder, told me I was family, not just a landlord. Now apparently I was the anchor dragging them down. Around 9 there was a soft knock at my door. Emily. Her eyes looked tired, shadows underneath them like bruises from sleeplessness. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. She never needed one, and wordlessly sat across from me. For a moment we just looked at each other, the silence thick with things neither of us knew how to say. Ethan told me you changed your will, she blurted finally, fingers twisting in her lap. He was upset. I took a sip of coffee to give myself time. He was more than upset, I said calmly. He was furious that my property isn't arranged to his liking. She flinched. Dad, he just worries about the future, about us, about the kids. He's under a lot of pressure. We're all under pressure, I replied quietly. That doesn't excuse greed. Her eyes glossed. Greed? He's just trying to build a life. We can't stay in this building forever, you know that. The plumbing, the heat, the stairs. What if you fall? What if the kids get burned on one of these old radiators? We need somewhere newer, safer, he thought. She hesitated, searching for a word that wouldn't sound as bad as the truth. He thought your estate would help with that. My estate, I repeated. You mean the building, the one you're currently living in for 2/3 of market rent? Color rose in her cheeks. Dad, you know we're grateful. Are you? I asked, more sharply than intended. She recoiled slightly. I sighed, forcing my tone to soften. Emily, gratitude isn't something you say once and then live the opposite of. Gratitude doesn't sound like your husband calling me a burden and planning his life around what he thinks I'll leave him. Tears spilled over. You heard that. It wasn't a question. I nodded. I heard enough. She covered her face with her hands. I didn't mean for you to. I was going to talk to him. I didn't know how. You don't have to apologize for what he said, I told her. But you do have to decide whether you believe it. She looked at me, eyes red. I don't think you're a burden, she whispered. I feel pulled in every direction. Ethan says we're stuck because we're waiting for you to. She couldn't say it. To die, I supplied quietly. She winced as if slapped. He shouldn't talk like that, she said. But he does, I replied, and that's the reality we're dealing with. We sat in silence again, the radiator clicks filling the spaces between us. Finally, she took a deep breath. Did you really cut me out of the will? No, I said, watching relief wash over her face for about half a second. I didn't cut you out. I changed how things would work, and I didn't do it out of spite, Emily. I did it to protect what I've built. Protect it from who? She asked, though she already knew. From being treated like a prize to be cashed in, I said. From people who see it as the solution to all their problems instead of what it is, a home for families and the result of a lifetime of sacrifice. She swallowed hard. What did you do exactly? That, I said gently, is a conversation for another day, when everyone involved is willing to listen instead of demand. She nodded, but I could see the wheels turning, the war inside her between loyalty to her husband and the little girl who used to hold my hand crossing the street. After she left, I stared at the door for a long time, then picked up the phone and dialed Sandra's office. We need to go over everything again, I told her. I have a feeling the storm is about to hit. The next afternoon, I sat in her conference room with my reading glasses low on my nose, the will and trust documents spread out before us like battle plans. Sandra, with her gray bob and sharp eyes, tapped a paragraph with her pen. Nothing has changed since we executed this, Henry, she said. The building is held in the Lewis Family Trust. Upon your passing, management transfers to the nonprofit housing organization we specified. Your liquid assets go into education funds for your grandchildren and modest support for Emily. There is no direct inheritance for Ethan, nor any guarantee of ownership for either of them. I'd read those lines a dozen times, but seeing them again steadied me. And there's nothing he can do, I asked. Nothing legal, she replied. He can try to pressure you, manipulate you, maybe even drag you to one of those specialists who diagnose capacity issues. But legally, until a court declares you incompetent, your decisions stand. And those letters we added, I asked. She smiled faintly. They're not legally binding, but they're powerful. A letter to each grandchild explaining why you chose to support them directly. A letter to Emily explaining that love doesn't always mean giving someone exactly what they want. I nodded. Those letters had taken the most out of me, more than signing any legal document. Explaining to my daughter that I loved her enough not to hand her into the grip of her husband's entitlement. On my way home, my phone rang, unknown number from a bank. I answered cautiously. Mr. Lewis, a bright young voice chirped. This is Claire from Northgate Bank. We just wanted to verify some information regarding a loan application referencing you as a guarantor. My grip tightened on the wheel. A what? A guarantor, she repeated. on a mortgage pre-approval for Ethan and Emily Hensley. The notes here say your property value and expected inheritance will support the lending decision. We just need to confirm that you intend to stop right there, I said, pulling the car to the side of the road. I have not agreed to guarantee anything. There was a pause on the line, paper rustling. Oh, the applicant stated you would, given your age and estate planning, the underwriter assumed. Then the applicant lied, I said flatly. My estate is my business and no one is authorized to use it as collateral. Her voice shifted, more careful now. Understood, sir. Thank you for your time. We'll make a note of that. When I hung up, my hands were shaking not from age but from anger. Ethan wasn't just planning to benefit from my death. He was already leveraging it while I was still very much alive. That night, I knocked on their door instead of waiting for them to come to mine. Ethan opened it, irritation already loaded in his features. We're in the middle of dinner, he snapped. Then this won't take long, I replied, stepping past him. Emily looked up from the table, fork suspended halfway to her mouth, eyes wide. The twins sat beside her, chattering softly, unaware of the storm about to roll in. Dad, she asked, everything okay? I took a deep breath. No, I said plainly, everything is not okay, we need to talk, all of us. Ethan scoffed. If this is about the will again, this is about the bank, I cut in, the color drained from his face. What bank? The one that called me to verify that I was guaranteeing your mortgage with my property, I said. The one you told I'd back your loan with my expected inheritance plan. Emily's fork clattered onto her plate. Ethan, she whispered, please tell me you didn't. He lifted his chin, defensive. I was working on our future, that's what adults do. We can't rot in this building forever because your father won't face reality. Reality, I repeated. The reality is that you're trying to spend what you do not own and dictate the terms of a life you did not build. His eyes flashed. You are ruining our life, he snapped, louder now, hands slamming on the table. You're clinging to this place to control, to some fantasy that you matter more than you do and we're the ones paying for it. You're selfish, you're stubborn, and you're dragging us down with you. The twins went silent, staring at their father with frightened eyes. Emily pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. In that moment, something in me settled, like a piece finally dropping into place. I looked at my grandson and granddaughter, then at my daughter, then at the man who had just shouted that I didn't matter. And I realized something very simple and very liberating. I didn't need his approval, I didn't need his gratitude, and I certainly didn't need to leave him anything. All right, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the tension more effectively than shouting ever could. Since you've said your piece, it's time I say mine. Tomorrow you're both coming with me to Sandra's office. You want to talk about my estate, about this building, about who's ruining whose life. Fine, we'll do it in front of a lawyer. We'll put everything on the table. Ethan sneered. You can't scare me with lawyers. I met his gaze steadily. Oh, I'm not trying to scare you, Ethan, I said. I'm going to educate you. And I promise you this, after tomorrow, you'll never look at this building or me the same way again. Emily whispered, Dad, what does that mean? I looked at her with all the love and pain in my chest. It means, sweetheart, that it's time you learn the truth about what I've really done with my life's work, and who I've trusted it to, and it's not the man who just shouted that I don't matter. The next day in Sandra's polished conference room, under bright office lights and with legal documents stacked like quiet witnesses, Ethan would finally discover that the building he complained about, the building he treated as his future prize, the building he thought he'd escape from into something better, was never his to begin with. Not now, not ever. And that revelation would be the first crack in the foundation of the life he thought he controlled. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, not because of nerves, but because peace had finally settled over me, peace born from certainty. I had spent years avoiding confrontation, letting slights slide, allowing decisions to be made around me rather than through me, all because I believed that family harmony was more important than my pride. But there comes a point when silence becomes permission, and I realized that by staying quiet, I had allowed Ethan to believe he held power he never earned, authority he never deserved, an entitlement that had grown like mold in the corners of his mind. When I stepped outside to wait for them, the winter air was sharp enough to bite, and a thin layer of frost glazed the stair rails. I stood at the bottom of the steps, watching my breath fog in front of me when their door opened. Emily came out first, the twins at her legs, her expression tired and weighed down by a mixture of guilt, dread, and love. Ethan followed, shutting the door not gently but with the annoyance of someone being forced to do something beneath him. He didn't look at me as he stepped down the stairs, pulling on gloves like he was preparing for battle. Let's get this over with, he muttered. We have plans today. I'm aware, I said softly, leading the way to my old sedan. We'll try not to ruin your life by taking an hour of your time. His jaw tightened. Emily shot me a pleading look, half apology, half fear of what was coming. The drive to Sandra's office was painfully silent. The twins had been left with a neighbor, so the car felt even smaller with the weight of 3 adults holding unspoken arguments between them. Ethan scrolled through his phone with exaggerated sighs, muttering about mortgage rates, condo listings, lender meetings, and being forced to start from scratch because of your father. I gripped the steering wheel tighter but said nothing. There was no point arguing with someone whose entire worldview was built upon the assumption that others existed only to support his version of success. Sandra's office was on the 4th floor of a refurbished mill building, exposed brick, tall windows, polished concrete floors. The kind of modern space that people like Ethan considered a sign of importance. As we rode the elevator, he straightened his jacket, smoothed his hair, and cleared his throat, practicing whatever persona he thought would impress a lawyer. Emily stood quietly at my side, clutching her coat like armor. When we entered the conference room, Sandra was already seated at the long table, her glasses perched low on her nose as she reviewed a stack of documents. She stood when we walked in, extending her hand. Mr. Walters, Emily. Then she turned to Ethan with a polite but cool nod. You must be the son-in-law. Ethan puffed his chest a little. Yes, I'm handling my family's financial future, so I'll be taking the lead here. Sandra gave him a long, level look, the kind lawyers reserve for people who have no idea how small they really are. This meeting is for clarification, she said. Not for debate, not for demands. You are here as an observer. Ethan frowned. Excuse me. We are discussing Mr. Walters' estate, Sandra said firmly, not yours. He opened his mouth to argue, but Emily squeezed his hand, a silent plea to stop. Sandra motioned for everyone to sit, then she began. As per Mr. Walters' legally executed estate plan, the Lewis Family Trust holds full ownership of the residential building at 14 Hawthorne Street. Ethan smirked. We know that. Emily inherits it, obviously. Sandra lifted one eyebrow. Does she? Ethan's smile froze. He turned sharply toward Emily. What does she mean? Emily's breath hitched. She didn't know. Of course she didn't. Because I had protected her from the burden, from the pressure, from the resentment that would surely follow. Sandra continued, her tone measured and professional but unyielding. Upon Mr. Walters' passing, the building is designated to transfer not to any individual heir but to the Hawthorne Community Housing Foundation, a nonprofit organization Mr. Walters has supported for over 15 years. Silence, full cavernous silence that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Then you're lying. Ethan's voice was shaky and credulous. This is some kind of mistake. There is no mistake, Sandra said, sliding the trust document across the table. You are welcome to read the transfer clause yourself. Ethan snatched the papers and scanned them, eyes darting wildly. His face shifted from confusion to disbelief to rage in a matter of seconds. This is insane, he shouted, slamming the folder shut. You're giving away the building, all of it, to strangers, to charity, to families who rely on stable housing, I corrected. Families like you and Emily once were. We don't need charity, Ethan spat. We need assets, a legacy. A foundation to build our future. A foundation you're not entitled to, I said calmly, and certainly not when you get to demand. He shot up from his chair so fast it scraped loudly against the floor. You can't do this. Emily is your daughter. She deserves this. Our kids deserve this. My grandchildren will be cared for, I said. Their education funds are established. Their future is secure. What you want isn't security, it's profit, and that is something I will never fund. Emily looked at me, tears filling her eyes. Dad, you never told me. Because I didn't want you to feel responsible for my choices, I said gently, and I didn't want your marriage shaped around the expectation of an inheritance that was never promised. Ethan jabbed a finger at Sandra. Fix it. No, she said simply. Undo it. No, change it. Absolutely not. Ethan turned on me now, eyes blazing. You're destroying us. Do you know how much time I put into planning our life? Do you know what we could have done with this property? Do you know what that building is worth? Yes, I replied evenly. I know exactly what it's worth because I spent 20 years paying for it, repairing it, maintaining it, and ensuring it remained affordable for people who needed it, he scoffed. Affordable? You could have made triple what you collect, and what would that have changed? I asked. Would it have bought you humility, gratitude, respect for your family? His mouth snapped shut. Behind him, Emily wiped a tear from her cheek. Sandra folded her hands. Let us be very clear, Mr. Hensley, you have no legal claim to this property. None. Your wife does not own it. She will not own it. She's cared for in other ways, but the building is not and has never been her inheritance. Ethan's breathing grew harsh. You bastard, he whispered. You selfish old bastard, Emily gasped. Ethan, but I only leaned back in my chair, looking at him with a kind of detached clarity. I'm not selfish for protecting what I built from someone who sees it as a lottery ticket. I'm not selfish for refusing to reward entitlement, for refusing to be manipulated, for refusing to let you treat my estate like a down payment on your ego. This isn't over, he growled. You think you can cut us out and walk away? You think Emily will stay by your side after this? Emily looked at him with a mix of heartbreak and realization, and in that moment I saw the fracture forming, the first hairline crack in the illusion of the marriage she thought she had. This isn't about sides, she whispered. This is about honesty. Ethan turned away, pacing like a trapped animal. I'm going to fight this, he said. I'll find a lawyer, I'll challenge your capacity, I'll sue that foundation, You'll fail, Sandra interrupted. Every time. Ethan stared at me with venom. You're ruining our life, he said again, quieter this time, but more poisonous. I held his gaze. No, I said softly, I'm saving my daughters. He froze. Emily covered her mouth, sobbing. And in that moment, everything changed, not because of my will, not because of the building, but because Ethan finally realized the truth. The power he thought he had never existed in the first place. I thought the meeting at Sandra's office would be the explosion, the rupture that tore everything open and left us sifting through emotional rubble. But it turned out to be something else. A fault line exposed, not yet fully broken, the kind that warns you a bigger quake is coming, and sure enough, it didn't take long for the ground to give way beneath Ethan's carefully constructed life. 2 days later, the building itself became the stage for his downfall, with more witnesses than he ever intended. The morning after the meeting, he and Emily barely spoke to me. They swept past my door on the way to work, tension hanging off them like static. That evening, I heard the muffled thud of their argument through the ceiling, her voice breaking, his sharp and defensive, and I sat in my chair with a book in my lap, not reading a single word, just listening to phrases rise and fall like waves in a storm. You lied to me, Emily cried. You built our entire future around something that was never yours. Your father blindsided us, Ethan shot back. You're taking his side after what he did. He didn't do this to you, she insisted. You did this to yourself. The argument went on for an hour, then another, trips up and down the stairs, doors slamming, the kind of fight that redraws the lines between two people and shows them exactly where they stand. I heard the front door slam just after midnight, footsteps stomping down the steps, then the roar of Ethan's car starting and tearing away. Next morning, Emily knocked on my door, eyes red, hair unbrushed, wrapped in one of my old sweaters she'd stolen back in college and never given up. He's gone, she said simply, though I suspected even she didn't know whether that meant for the night, the week, or forever. I gestured her inside, made coffee, handed her a mug the way I had when she came home with scraped knees and heartbreaks over middle school crushes. He says you humiliated him, she whispered after a while, staring into the steam. Says you stripped him of his dignity in front of a stranger. What dignity, I asked quietly, rests solely on the expectation of inheriting another man's work. She didn't answer, she didn't need to, her silence said enough. The real trouble began 3 days later when Ethan returned not with an apology but with a plan. I heard him before I saw him, his voice echoing up the stairwell from the lobby, amplified and performative, the way people sound when they're not just venting but campaigning. I'm telling you, he said loudly, this building is falling apart because he refuses to invest in it. The heat goes out, the pipes rattle, the windows leak, you've all complained about it. And now he's giving the whole thing away to some foundation, to strangers. What about us? What about the people who live here now? I opened my door and leaned over the railing, looking down into the lobby. Ethan stood at the center like he was holding court, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt, eyes bright with indignation. 3 other tenants stood around him, Mrs. Alvarez from 1A, the young couple from 3C, and Mr. Patel from 4B, each looking uneasy and half-dressed for a day they hadn't planned on starting with a confrontation. Morning, I called down, voice calm but carrying. All eyes turned upward. Ethan's smile sharpened. Perfect, he said. Everyone should hear this from you. I descended the stairs slowly, one hand on the rail more because of habit than need. At the bottom, Ethan folded his arms. Tell them, he demanded. Tell them what you told us about giving their building to some organization instead of keeping it in the family, instead of letting the people who actually live here have any say. The tenants looked at me not accusingly, but expectantly. They didn't know what to believe yet. Is that true, Mr. Lewis? Mrs. Alvarez asked gently. That you're turning the building over? Yes, I said. One day when I'm gone, not tomorrow, not next week, but the plan is for the Hawthorne Community Housing Foundation to take over, yes. Ethan spread his hands. See, and none of you were told, none of you asked. He's making decisions about your homes behind your backs. That's what I've been trying to say. He's ruining people's lives. Says the man who never fixes anything himself, muttered Mr. Patel. It was quiet, but not quiet enough. Ethan rounded on him. Excuse me, you heard me, Mr. Patel said, squaring his shoulders. I've lived here 10 years. When the sink broke, your father-in-law came at midnight with a wrench. When the roof leaked, he patched it himself. When my wife got sick and we struggled with the rent, he told us to pay what we could and we'd make up the rest later. Has he raised the rent in 10 years? No, but you whine about the heat being temporarily out as if he turned it off to spite you. Ethan gaped at him, caught off guard. Mrs. Alvarez nodded, stepping closer to me. When my son lost his job, she added, voice trembling, you know what this man did? She rested a hand on my arm. He gave us 2 months free and brought over groceries every Sunday. You weren't here then, Ethan, you didn't see. The young woman from 3C, Jenna, if I remembered right, spoke up next. Yeah, the building's old, she said, but my rent is half what my coworkers pay downtown. This is the only reason I can afford daycare. I've seen him doing maintenance himself. I've never seen you do anything but complain. Ethan's face flushed deep red. You're all missing the point, he snapped. He's giving away something that should stay in the family. Emily and I are kids, we deserve security. Instead, he's handing our future over to a bunch of strangers with a mission statement. Those strangers, came a new voice from the front door, are the reason this building will still be standing and affordable in 20 years instead of being torn down for condos. We all turned. A woman in a dark coat and neat scarf stood at the entrance, holding a leather folder. Her hair was streaked with gray at the temples, her posture confident. She smiled at me. Mr. Lewis, she said, I hope I'm not too early. Traffic was lighter than I expected. Right on time, Laura, I said, relief washing through me like warm water. Everyone, this is Laura Mayers, director of the Hawthorne Community Housing Foundation. Ethan's jaw clenched. Of course, he muttered. You brought reinforcements. Laura stepped inside, stamping snow from her boots. I came, she said, because Mr. Lewis asked me to speak with tenants about the long-term plan for the building. Transparency matters. She glanced at Ethan. I gather I've walked into a lively discussion. You're taking our homes, he shot back. You're stealing our security. On the contrary, she replied calmly, we're ensuring it. Mr. Lewis approached us years ago with a proposal. When he passes, instead of selling this building to the highest bidder, he wanted to guarantee it would remain affordable housing. It's written into the trust that no unit can ever be converted to luxury condos or priced beyond a certain percentage of median income. We're not developers, we're stewards. Murmurs rose among the tenants, not panicked this time, but curious, cautiously hopeful. So we won't be kicked out, Jenna asked. Not unless you violate your lease, Laura said. If anything, you'll benefit. We have grant money for infrastructure improvements, new heating, better insulation, maybe even an elevator if we secure the funds. Mr. Lewis has been patching this place with his bare hands and limited savings. We can do more because he made sure of it. All eyes swung back to me. I suddenly felt shy under the attention. I didn't do anything special, I mumbled. Just didn't want this place turned into glass boxes no one I know could afford. Ethan barked a laugh, high and strained. And what about us, he demanded. What about your actual flesh and blood? Where do we fit into this noble little plan? Laura's eyes hardened. Sir, with respect, this meeting is about tenants, not your personal financial expectations. But since you asked, Mr. Lewis has arranged education funds for his grandchildren. Beyond that, it's his right to allocate his estate as he sees fit. You are not entitled to profit off other people's rent. His composure snapped. Do you all hear this? He cried, voice cracking. He's choosing a building over his own family, choosing strangers over his daughter and grandchildren. Emily's voice floated down from the stairs. I hadn't realized she was there, but now she emerged, wrapped in a cardigan, face pale but resolute. No, she said softly, each word clear. He's choosing integrity. You're the one who tried to use his death as leverage with a bank. Gasps rippled through the group. Ethan stared at her, betrayal and fury battling in his eyes. You told them. I didn't have to, she said. The bank called him. Your lies are catching up with you, Ethan. She came down the last few steps, moving to stand beside me. For the first time in months, we were shoulder to shoulder, a united line. She slipped her hand into mine just briefly, like she used to when she was small. Dad's not ruining our life, she continued. He's just refusing to fund the version of it you wanted. There's a difference. Ethan looked around, realizing that for once the audience wasn't on his side. Neighbors he'd greeted in passing now looked at him with cool appraisal, some with open disapproval. The man who'd always expected to be seen as the responsible one, the planner, the future provider, now stood exposed as someone who had built his plans on sand. This isn't over, he said again, but the words sounded smaller now, like a child insisting he wasn't tired while rubbing sleep from his eyes. You'll regret this, all of you will. He stormed out, door crashing against its frame, and for a moment no one moved. Then Mrs. Alvarez exhaled. I always wondered, she murmured, why he talked so much about what he was owed and so little about what he'd done. Laura turned to me. You've done a good thing, Mr. Lewis, she said, not just with the trust, but with this, with the truth. I shrugged, suddenly exhausted. I just stopped letting someone else narrate my story. Later, when the tenants had gone back upstairs, reassured that their homes weren't being ripped out from under them, and Laura and I had finished signing a few more preliminary documents at my kitchen table, Emily sat across from me, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. The building hummed with its usual sounds, pipes, footsteps, a TV somewhere playing an afternoon show. I didn't know you'd done all this, she said quietly. The foundation, the rent caps, the letters. I studied her face, the woman she'd grown into layered over the little girl I'd raised. I didn't do it to hurt you, I said. I did it so that when I'm gone, this place still means something good, so it doesn't become a battleground or a commodity, so the people who have trusted me for years don't wake up to an eviction notice and a luxury development sign. Tears shone in her eyes, but they didn't fall. I get that now, she whispered. I just wish I'd seen what he was becoming before this. See it now, I answered. That's what matters. She took a deep breath, looked me straight in the eye. Dad, I'm not staying with him, not after this, not after seeing how he talks about you, about money, about other people. I won't raise my kids around that. My heart ached for her loss, but also swelled with pride. You'll be all right, I asked. You and the twins, she smiled through the sadness. We will, maybe not rich, but all right, and if it's okay, I'd like for us to stay here at least for a while. Not because I'm waiting for anything, just because it feels like home. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. As long as I'm alive, I said, voice thick, this building is your home as my daughter, not as my heir. She nodded, understanding the distinction, and somehow that made all the difference. Ethan thought I was ruining their life because I refused to hand him the keys to my kingdom. But standing there in that old brick building I'd poured my soul into, with my daughter beside me and the tenants above us secure in their homes, I realized something simple and profound. I hadn't ruined anything. I just finally stopped letting the wrong person write the definition of what a good life should look like. And Ethan, his ruin hadn't come from my choices, it had come from his own. In the weeks that followed, the building returned to its usual rhythms on the surface. Radiators hissing, doors opening and closing, kids thundering up the stairs after school, televisions murmuring through walls. But underneath, everything had shifted, the air felt clearer. The tension that had once seeped under my door from upstairs seemed to evaporate bit by bit as Ethan's presence faded from our daily lives like smoke after a fire. 2 days after his dramatic exit in the lobby, he came back once more, not with apologies but with a moving truck and two friends, stomping up the stairs with boxes and slamming drawers while Emily and the twins stayed in my apartment. The kids watching cartoons in the living room while she sat at my kitchen table clutching a mug of tea gone cold. Every time a box hit the stair, she flinched, but her jaw stayed set, eyes fixed on a spot on the wall as if looking at him would give his tantrum more power than it deserved. We heard him stomp down the stairs one last time, heard the front door slam, heard the rumble of the truck pulling away. No goodbye, no last look, just absence where noise had always been. When the silence landed, Emily let out a breath so long and shaky it sounded like something leaving her body for good. That's it, she whispered. He's gone. I watched her for a moment, waiting to see if the weight of that reality would crush her. Instead, it seemed to rearrange her. She sat up a little straighter, rubbed her eyes, and for the first time in months, I saw a version of my daughter that existed before Ethan had scaled her life like ivy, climbing up and covering everything. I filed separation papers, she told me later that week. He called me dramatic. Said I was throwing away a once-in-a-lifetime financial alignment. She shook her head with a humorless little laugh. That's what he called us, not a marriage, not a family, a financial alignment. She looked at me then, really looked, and said softly, I think you were right all along, I just didn't want to see it. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't remind her of the years I'd bit my tongue when he bragged too loud, calculated too openly, measured every kindness in projected returns. Instead, I helped her move the twins' beds into the vacant third-floor unit that had just opened up, bigger, sunnier, closer to my own place. We painted the walls together one weekend, her in an old college t-shirt, me in a pair of jeans splattered with colors from a dozen past projects, the twins racing around with tiny foam rollers I'd bought just for them. They called it our new home without ever once calling it ours when Grandpa dies, and that alone told me I'd made the right choice. The building itself, that old brick beast I'd wrestled with and loved for 2 decades, seemed to respond to the new chapter. Laura and her foundation came through as promised, securing grants I'd never have qualified for on my own. Within 3 months, new boilers were installed, the drafty back stairwell windows were replaced, and an accessibility ramp was added to the front entrance so Mr. Patel's wife could come and go without struggling. I watched workers in bright vests haul pipes and equipment up and down, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilty about what I couldn't do anymore. Instead, I felt proud that I'd set things in motion for people who could. One afternoon, I found myself standing on the sidewalk across the street, looking up at the facade, the same red-brown brick, the same black iron railings, but with new windows, new life. A couple I didn't recognize walked out with a toddler in their arms, laughing about something, and it hit me all at once. This building would outlive me, and it would outlive Ethan's bitterness too. It would not become the gleaming condo tower he had pictured when he spoke about our future, but that didn't make it a lesser legacy in my eyes, it made it greater. As for Ethan, he didn't disappear entirely. Men like him rarely vanish without trying one last time to bend the story in their favor. He tried to challenge my capacity, as promised, sending some slick young lawyer to question whether an 82-year-old man could really be making rational long-term decisions. Sandra shredded that argument in one meeting with medical evaluations, decades of financial records showing consistent reasoning, and to the young lawyer's visible discomfort, testimony from tenants who had known me longer than he'd been alive. Mrs. Alvarez sat straight-backed in that conference chair and told them in no uncertain terms that any man who could climb 3 flights of stairs at 2 a.m. to fix a burst pipe and then refuse extra rent from a struggling family had more sense than most people half his age. When the attempt failed, Ethan pivoted to something more fitting his character: a social media campaign. Anonymous posts on neighborhood groups about a selfish landlord giving away property instead of caring for his own blood, vague rants about old people with outdated values. They trickled back to me via screenshots from acquaintances, but what made me smile wasn't the pettiness, it was the comments underneath. People from the building chimed in, refuting his claims. Former tenants wrote about the stability those old walls had given them during hard times. Even a clerk from the local grocery store chimed in, saying I always bought extra when I knew rents were tight. If this is selfish, one comment read, we could use a lot more selfish around here. After that, the posts dwindled. It's hard to keep shouting when no one is willing to play the echo. Meanwhile, real life continued. I started taking my grandson to the park on Tuesday afternoons while Emily worked, teaching him the difference between a flathead and a Phillips screwdriver with toy tools he swung around like swords. My granddaughter, who had inherited her grandmother's artistic streak, started bringing me her drawings of the building, crooked little rectangles with smiling windows and hearts floating above the roof. One day, she handed me one with a tiny speech bubble drawn over the front door that said, "Welcome home." I taped it above my desk next to the first photo of the building the day I signed the deed, back when it had broken steps and boarded windows. Two pictures decades apart telling the same story. You don't need marble floors and glass balconies to build something worthy of pride. In quieter moments, I thought about the words that had started it all: your father is ruining our life, and I realized how deeply they reflected Ethan's worldview. In his eyes, anything that didn't bend to his plans was sabotage. Anyone who refused to hand him exactly what he wanted was an enemy. But in my eyes, saying no to him had not ruined anything important. It had exposed what was already broken. It had shown my daughter who she had married. It had given her the chance to choose a different path while she was still young enough to walk it. One Sunday evening, months after Ethan had left, Emily and I sat on the front steps together, watching the twins chalk on the sidewalk flowers and crooked suns in what I think was meant to be my old car. The air smelled like someone's cooking onions and garlic wafting down from an open window. The building hummed with life behind us. Do you ever regret it? She asked suddenly, breaking our comfortable silence. Changing the will, choosing the foundation, not leaving it to me to us. I took my time answering, watching the twins argue over chalk colors. Do you think I should? I asked gently. She shook her head almost immediately. No, I think you saved us from something. If you left it all to us, Ethan would have chased that money like blood. He would have pushed you into a home the second he thought he could get away with it. He already tried to control our choices based on what he thought he'd get from you. She looked at me, eyes shining in the fading light. You didn't ruin our life, Dad. You just refused to let him dictate it. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Then no, I said, I don't regret it, not for a second. I thought about Anna then, my late wife, about the conversations we used to have sitting at this very spot when the building was still half empty and we weren't sure we'd be able to keep up with the repairs. At least, she'd say, if we go broke, we'll go broke doing something that matters. I smiled at the memory and at the realization that I hadn't gone broke, not really. My bank accounts weren't large, but my life was full of noisy neighbors, of grandchildren's laughter echoing in the stairwell, of a daughter rediscovering herself outside of a man who measured worth in dollar signs. And Ethan, somewhere out there, he was probably still telling people that I'd destroyed his future. But when I looked around at the building standing solid against the twilight sky, at the families inside cooking dinner and helping kids with homework, at my granddaughter drawing a crooked heart around a stick figure version of me, I knew the truth. The only life I'd ruined was the one built on greed, entitlement, and fantasy. Everything else, everything that mattered, I'd helped to save. And if that makes me the villain in his story, I can live with that. Because in mine, I'm exactly what I always wanted to be. A father who protected his daughter, a grandfather who will be remembered for more than what he left behind, and an old man who refused to hand his life's work to someone who saw it as nothing more than a stepping stone. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about Henry's decision in the comments below. And when you're ready for another emotional family drama, just click on the next story waiting for you.